Greetings, colleagues. My name is Bryn Coriell, and I'm the Multiple Subject Credential Coordinator at Humboldt State University in the School of Education. And this is for Education 620, My Powerful Learning Experience. I'm pursuing a master's degree in education focused on wilderness education. A powerful learning experience that stands out for me is when I was 20 years old in my third year at UC Santa Cruz. I was taking a class on the natural history of the Sonoran Desert, and I was asked to reflect on a poem by Wendell Berry called The Peace of Wild Things. I was about 40 miles from the nearest town, far out in the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona. It was December 1997, and our class of 2 instructors and 8 students had been backpacking for 2 months through the desert. We would start in a small town in Arizona and drive jugs of water way out into the desert, creating caches of water 21 miles apart. We would then return to town and walk for 10 days at a time, studying natural history, ecology, and the role of civilization. We would each carry 3 gallons of water, which would last 3 days. Thus, we had to hike 7 or more miles per day, carrying 75 pounds of gear and water to reach our next cache of water, or we would die of thirst. During one of our evening campfires, we were asked to read the poem by Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things, reflect on it overnight, and come together as a group the next morning to discuss it. The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, written in 1934. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests, in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars, waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and am free. The night was very cold. It was a full moon. I lay out my 5 by 8 foot tarp and curled up in my 0-degree down sleeping bag. I watched the night and thought about the poem I had read. I thought about how it resonated with me, not as a message of despair for the future, but as a message of how, if we give ourselves the opportunity to slow down and look around us, there is immeasurable beauty in the natural world. I thought about how I would like to be influential in preserving this beauty for future generations. I repeated the poem over and over in my head, and then I heard a strange crinkling noise. I turned my gaze from staring at the moon, and there, a foot from my head, crawling across my blue tarp, was a giant 5-inch diameter albino tarantula. A giant 5-inch diameter albino tarantula. How did I feel during this learning experience? At first I felt ecstatic at being way out in the desert, virtually alone. We all slept pretty far apart to minimize impact. Cozy in my sleeping bag under a full moon, reflective of my experience in wilderness education, and then pretty freaked out about a really big spider. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't squish the guy. After all, I was on his turf. I couldn't ask him to leave, and I certainly couldn't stay in the same place. Then I realized just how peaceful the big albino spider was. So I carefully got up, packed up all my gear, hiked about a quarter mile, and set up my bed again. I dove in, and believe it or not, I went to sleep. In the morning, I realized that through the whole experience, I had repeated the poem over and over and over again in my head. So at circle the next morning, I stood up and recited the poem from memory. I told my story of being visited by the albino tarantula and how it had cemented the message of the peace of wild things into my head. I think it was a surprise to my colleagues that I chose to memorize and recite the poem as my reflection, and that I was visited by an albino tarantula, which is very rare. This learning experience was valuable for me because it made me realize how important kinesthetic learning is, and that expression of knowledge does not have to merely be reading and writing or addition and subtraction. Learning can take many forms and be an expression of our mind and body. Movement enhances memory and adds to the experience, especially if you have to get up and pack up your bed and hike in the middle of the night. This is why I am pursuing a master's degree in wilderness education. This has been a Velocity Stilts production. Most of the images are stock images from Google, except this one, which is me. The presentation software is called Prezi, and the video production software I'm using is called Camtasia. The storyline is original and was written by me, and directed by my 2-year-old son, Caden. Thanks for listening.